Imagine, like spending 500 hours memorizing a dictionary. You ace every written grammar exam you can possibly find, and then you just freeze in absolute terror because a barista in London asks you, "What can I get you?"
Oh, yeah, your mind just goes entirely blank.
Exactly. It's this complete cognitive system failure.
Right, because the connection between your brain, where all that vocabulary is carefully stored, and your physical tongue, it just simply severs in real time.
It's the worst feeling. So we're doing a deep dive today into the art and science of mastering a new language as an adult. We've actually pulled together a massive stack of transcripts from popular language learning channels.
Yeah, places like Talk Emma, Mr. English, and English 1314.
Right, and our mission here is to extract the most effective counterintuitive methods for getting past that freeze response. We want to bypass the dry textbook approach and figure out how adult learners achieve actual fluency, genuine confidence, and, real human connection.
I love that.
So let's unpack this.
Well, the best place to start is with the most glaring roadblock every adult learner faces. And surprisingly, it is not a lack of vocabulary.
Right, or like a misunderstanding of verb conjugations or something.
Exactly. The primary barrier is actually the psychological fear of looking foolish. I mean, perfectionism completely short-circuits the language acquisition process.
Which makes a lot of sense when you think about the adult ego, right? By the time we reach our 20s or 30s, we're accustomed to feeling highly competent.
Oh, totally. We know how to navigate our careers. We know how to articulate really complex thoughts in our native tongue.
Yeah, we've built this solid identity around being capable. So stepping into a new language forces you back into this state of, total incompetence.
And our egos just rebel against that feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, we hate being reduced to pointing and grunting at things.
Just humiliating.
It is. But the reality of language learning is that making absurd, embarrassing mistakes is just a mandatory phase of the process.
It really is. Take this learner named Jack from the sources, for example. He was traveling abroad, feeling pretty confident about his basic vocabulary, and he decided to order a bowl of soup at a local restaurant.
Okay, sounds simple enough.
Right? But because he shifted a single vowel sound in his pronunciation, he looked the waiter dead in the eye and confidently ordered a bowl of soap.
Oh, no. A bowl of soap.
Yeah.
That is a classic vowel shift disaster. The physical mechanics of forming those words just weren't quite locked in for him yet.
Exactly. And the waiter just stared at him and politely informed him they didn't serve that.
I can only imagine the awkwardness.
Oh, or consider Emily, right? Another learner who was taking a cooking class in her target language.
All right.
The recipe called for sugar.
Let me guess. She grabbed the wrong ingredient.
She completely misread the labels, grabbed the wrong white powder, and confidently poured 2 massive cups of salt into a chocolate cake batter.
2 cups. Oh, my God.
Yeah, her classmates permanently nicknamed her the Salt Queen.
Wow. But the crucial takeaway from Emily's story isn't the mistake itself. I mean, it's her reaction to the mistake.
Right, because she didn't quit.
Exactly. She didn't quit the cooking class, and she didn't stop speaking the language. She laughed, she learned to taste the ingredients before pouring them, and she just kept moving forward.
She reframed the error, basically.
Yeah, from a personal failure into a necessary data point.
People always try to compare adult language learning to a baby learning to walk. But I actually think a better analogy is learning to play the piano.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, memorizing grammar rules first is like trying to learn a Chopin concerto by just staring at the sheet music, and like studying the mechanical blueprints of the piano.
Right. You can understand the physics of it perfectly.
But until you sit down and physically hit the wrong keys a few hundred times, you will never make music.
That is a much more accurate mechanical metaphor, honestly. The brain has to translate abstract knowledge into physical action.
But I do want to push back on one thing, though. Isn't grammar actually important? I mean, if I walk up to a native speaker and say something completely broken, like I go store now, I feel like people are going to judge my intelligence, or at the very least, completely misunderstand my intentions.
It is a really common fear, but it ignores the fundamental reality of human interaction. Like, communication always beats perfection.
Okay, so meaning over form.
Meaning comes first, form comes second. Always. If you say, I go store now, The person listening knows exactly what your intent is.
Right. They understand you're leaving to go to the market.
Exactly. Native speakers in the real world are not grading your syntax. They are looking for clear ideas and a friendly attitude.
So they're seeking a connection, not like administering a grammar exam.
Precisely. Letting go of that deep-seated need to sound smart and sophisticated is the mandatory first step to fluency.
It's like you have to be willing to sound like a toddler for a few months if you ever want to eventually sound like a poet.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so assuming a learner can drop that ego and accept the fact that they might accidentally order a side of soap with their dinner, where do they actually start?
Right, what's step one?
Yeah, if we are throwing out the grammar workbooks, what is the first tangible step?
Well, we have to look at the neurology of how vocabulary moves from passive memory into active memory.
Oh, there is a brilliant story in the transcripts that illustrates this perfectly. It involves a 26-year-old software engineer from Brazil named Jake.
Okay, the tech guy.
Yeah. So Jake is exceptional at his job. He writes complex code day in and day out. And he finally lands an interview for his absolute dream job at an international tech company. The stakes are incredibly high for him.
And he likely already possesses a pretty strong technical understanding of English, given his field.
He does. He can read the manuals, he can pass written exams, and he understands the grammar perfectly.
But then he actually has to speak.
Right. He gets onto this video call with 3 native speakers, and they ask him a really standard introductory question, like, tell us about yourself and your work.
Which should be easy.
But Jake says his brain knew the answer, yet his mouth physically would not move properly.
Oh, man.
He stumbled through broken words, an awful, heavy silence settled over the call, and he failed the interview.
That is heartbreaking. But what Jake experienced there was a clash between 2 completely different memory systems in the brain.
Explain that, because I think a lot of people relate to that freeze.
So when you learn a language from a textbook, your brain stores that information in your declarative memory.
Declarative memory, okay.
Yeah, that is the same place you store historical dates or math formulas. It is information you have to consciously retrieve.
But speaking in real time doesn't give you the luxury of conscious retrieval, does it?
Not at all. Speaking requires procedural memory. That is the system you use to ride a bicycle or swing a tennis racket. It is automatic, it's physical, and subconscious.
So the freeze happens because learners are trying to use a math system to perform an athletic event.
Exactly. They are trying to consciously construct sentences word by word while the conversation is moving at the speed of sound.
He was essentially trying to solve a complex algebra equation every time he opened his mouth, instead of just swinging the bat.
Right. And you just can't keep up.
But after that crushing interview, Jake didn't quit. He actually developed what he called his 5-month method. And his very first rule for the initial 15 days was completely counterintuitive.
What was it?
He banned himself from learning any new words.
Which is brilliant, because his problem was never a lack of vocabulary.
Right.
His problem was an inability to access the vocabulary he already possessed.
He realized he had this massive warehouse of words, but no roads leading to them. So he created a list of 50 survival sentences.
Like basic practical phrases.
Yeah, highly practical phrases like, hi, how are you? I need a coffee, please. And can you repeat that?
Okay, simple stuff.
And every single morning, he would stand up and read those 50 sentences out loud, 10 times each.
The mechanics of what Jake was doing are really crucial here. He was training his physical articulators, his tongue, his lips, his vocal cords, to form English sounds without hesitation.
Building that procedural muscle memory.
Exactly. By practicing these larger survival blocks, instead of single, isolated words, his brain began to bypass that slow, painful process of translating from Portuguese to English.
He was taking the vocabulary from that passive, declarative storage and forcing it into active procedural readiness.
And it works.
It really does. And once those foundational blocks became automatic, he started stacking them using a technique he called the question-answer method.
That method functions a lot like progressive overload in weightlifting, if you think about it.
Exactly like that. He would ask himself a question out loud, like, what did you do today? And he would answer with a tiny pre-built block. I worked.
Okay.
Then he would ask it again and force a slight expansion. I worked on my project. Then
Okay.
again, I worked on my project for 3 hours. Then I took a break.
So by adding tiny weights to the barbell over time, he was training his mind to hold longer and longer strings of thought in the target language.
Which completely eliminates the translation lag.
Right, because you are no longer constructing sentences from scratch. You are just connecting pre-assembled blocks.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Practicing those blocks alone in a room is incredibly safe.
Well,
But reading sentences off a piece of paper doesn't teach you how native speakers actually sound.
no, it doesn't.
You can't learn the musicality or the rhythm of a language from text. And since most people don't have the luxury of moving to a foreign country to immerse themselves, how do they bridge that gap?
Well, the solution for solo practice is a highly effective technique known as shadowing.
When I first read about this in the transcripts, I immediately thought, I'm going to look completely unhinged doing this.
Oh, it definitely feels weird at first.
Because shadowing requires you to listen to a short audio clip, maybe 10 seconds of a podcast or a movie scene, and repeat what the speaker is saying at the exact same time. You act as a simultaneous audible echo.
Yeah, it requires a certain level of shamelessness, certainly.
Definitely. Take Emma, another learner, whose story really stood out. She was practicing her shadowing technique in a quiet, crowded cafe.
Oh, no.
Yeah. She had her noise-canceling earphones in, so she was completely unaware of her own volume.
That is a recipe for disaster.
She was shadowing an intense dialogue from an action movie, and without realizing it, she practically shouted, "Let's go, we don't have much time!" right in the middle of this peaceful coffee shop.
A sudden burst of cinematic urgency while people are just trying to drink their lattes.
Exactly. Everyone stopped and stared at her. But instead of letting that deter her, she realized she just needed a dedicated space where she could be loud and weird without the social friction.
That makes sense.
She called it her personal laboratory, a safe space, like the shower or the inside of her car during a commute, where she could over-exaggerate the sounds and narrate her daily life to herself, just standing there saying, "I am making coffee, the water is boiling."
That personal laboratory concept is vital because it manages cognitive load.
How so?
Well, when you are speaking to another person, a huge percentage of your brain's processing power is dedicated to managing social anxiety.
Oh, sure. You're reading their facial expressions, worrying about judgment.
Right, and planning your next response.
Yeah.
But when you are alone in your car, that social filter vanishes. Your cognitive bandwidth is completely freed up to focus entirely on the physical production of the language.
You're doing vocal warm-ups before the actual play begins.
Exactly.
But how does repeating things simultaneously actually help with the rhythm?
So it trains a feature of language called stress and intonation, which textbooks fundamentally cannot teach you.
Right.
Let's look at English as an example. English is a stress-timed language, meaning the time it takes to say a sentence depends on the number of stressed syllables, not the total number of syllables.
Let's demonstrate that for the listener, actually, because it's a huge distinction. If someone learns English purely from reading, they might give equal weight to every single word.
Like a syllable-timed language,
Yeah.
such as Spanish?
Right. So if we use a syllable-timed approach in English, I would say, what do you want to do? Every word gets a clear, equal beat.
But native English speakers don't talk like that. We swallow the unstressed words and emphasize the core meaning.
A native speaker blurs it all together and says, what do you want to do?
Yes. And shadowing forces your brain to recognize and mimic that specific chunking. When you echo a native speaker in real time, you can't stop to pronounce every single letter.
You just don't have the time.
Right. You are forced to adopt their rhythm, their melody, and their speed. And when you get that rhythm right, your speech sounds instantly more natural and comprehensible to a native ear.
Even if your actual vocabulary is quite simple.
Exactly.
It tunes the instrument. You realize that you don't actually need a conversation partner to make massive progress in your pronunciation and rhythm. You just need a 10-second audio clip, a quiet room, and the willingness to echo like a parrot.
That level of focused, solitary repetition is incredibly powerful. But, it brings up an entirely new challenge. Doing this for a week is fun and novel. Doing it on day 40, when the initial excitement has worn off and you are just standing in your kitchen talking to yourself about boiling water, that is a mental grind.
Oh, absolutely. Maintaining that discipline requires zooming out and looking at the broader psychological framework. And there's a fantastic historical example of this in the materials.
The Jack Ma story.
Yes. Long before he became a billionaire entrepreneur, Jack Ma was just a teenager in China in the 1970s and 80s who desperately wanted to learn English.
And he didn't have the internet, he didn't have shadowing apps, and he certainly didn't have access to native teachers.
Right, so he had to engineer his own immersion.
Which is incredible.
Every single morning, before sunrise, regardless of the weather, he would ride his bicycle to Westlake in his city. He would wait there for foreign tourists and offer them free guided tours of the area, solely so he could practice speaking with them.
The sheer audacity to approach strangers in a language you barely speak, it requires an immense tolerance for awkwardness.
He was completely fearless when it came to making mistakes. And this is a man who understood rejection intimately. I mean, later on, when KFC opened its first restaurant in his city, 24 people applied for a job.
I know this story. 23 people were hired.
And Jack Ma was the only person rejected.
That kind of statistical rejection would break most people's confidence entirely.
Completely. But he didn't view rejection or failure as a final judgment on his inherent worth. He viewed it as neutral data.
It was just another step in the process.
Exactly. He possessed an internal drive that wasn't dependent on immediate success or outside validation. And this ties perfectly into a beautiful psychological concept known as the inner sun.
I love that concept. The inner sun completely reframes how we view solo practice and solitary study.
How so?
Culturally, we tend to view being alone as a negative state, right? We equate isolation with loneliness. But the concept of the inner sun suggests that time spent alone shouldn't feel lonely. It should be viewed as an intentional, joyful investment in your own potential.
So you aren't isolating yourself from the world. You are building a quiet sanctuary where you can grow.
Exactly. Language learning at its deepest level is not just about acquiring a linguistic skill. It is an exercise in mastering your own attention.
That's powerful.
We have to differentiate between wasting time and investing time. Wasting time is mindless, like scrolling through social media for an hour and feeling cognitively drained afterward.
We've all been there.
Right. Investing time is taking 10 minutes of your morning to actively shadow an audio clip.
It requires saying no to the easy, immediate dopamine hit and saying yes to a difficult, delayed reward. I think the biggest mistake learners make is waiting until they feel inspired before they sit down to practice.
Because motivation is deeply misunderstood. People assume motivation leads to action.
But it's the other way around, isn't it?
Yes. In reality, action creates motivation. You force yourself to do the 10 minutes of shadowing, and the pride and sense of accomplishment you feel afterward is what generates the motivation to do it again the following day.
The discipline itself becomes the reward.
Exactly. By consistently showing up in your personal laboratory, you are fueling your inner sun. You are building self-respect because you are keeping a difficult promise to yourself.
So the ability to speak the language almost becomes a secondary byproduct of the character and resilience you are building in the background.
That's exactly right.
Well, let's bring all of these concepts together. For anyone listening who feels overwhelmed by their own learning journey or who constantly freezes up when it is time to speak, here's the blueprint we've extracted. First, you have to actively dismantle your perfectionism.
Except that you are going to sound silly.
Right. Except that you might accidentally order soap instead of soup and let go of the ego.
Prioritize clear communication over perfect form, meaning always wins.
Second, build your survival sentences. Stop trying to memorize 1,000 new words. Take the foundational vocabulary you already know and practice those blocks out loud every single day until they migrate from passive declarative knowledge into active procedural muscle memory.
Eliminate the translation lag by making the physical production automatic.
Third, construct your personal laboratory. Use the shadowing technique to absorb the music, the stress timing, and the rhythm of the language. Narrate your life to yourself without the filter of social anxiety.
And finally, treat that solo practice not as a lonely chore, but as a dedicated investment in your own inner sun.
Embrace the awkwardness and keep moving forward, just like Jack Ma on his bicycle.
It is an incredibly powerful roadmap, and I want to leave the listener with one final, lingering thought to ponder.
Lay it on us.
We have spent this time discussing how mastering a language requires you to face your insecurities, to boldly accept your own mistakes, and to become entirely comfortable sounding a little foolish.
It really acts as a masterclass in human vulnerability.
So what if the ultimate reward of learning a new language isn't just the practical ability to order a coffee in another country or the advantage of acing an international job interview?
Okay, what is it then?
What if the actual hidden benefit is that the rigorous process permanently rewires your brain? By forcing yourself to strip away your ego and be a beginner again, you might just be training yourself to be more resilient, more empathetic, and completely fearless in every other area of your life.
You aren't just learning a language. You are actively unlearning your fear of failure.
Exactly.
Which brings us right back to that busy coffee shop in London. The next time you feel your brain freeze and your tongue get tied, don't panic. Take a breath. Remember that a wobbly, imperfect step is still a step forward. Smile, make the mistake proudly, and just start talking.
Your inner sun will be much brighter for it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take this roadmap, build your survival blocks, and go take one small intentional action today. We will catch you next time.